The ground war in the Gulf has begun. US President George Bush is on his way back to the White House from Camp David. Alastair Stewart has this from Dhahran.
What we're gathering from American sources is so far the 2nd Marine Division, a force of some 20,000 men with M60 tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles, have crossed into Iraq. The 18th Airborne Division has moved into Kuwait. Their main armament is the Apache helicopter, which is equipped with TOW anti-tank missiles and Hellfire missiles that can destroy pretty well anything in their way. We were told that when it begins, this war will be prosecuted more violently than any in history. And the opening move certainly seemed to confirm that. The number of Iraqi vehicles already reported destroyed runs well into the double figures, and Iraqi troops are said to be surrendering en masse. The Allies have made preparations to take 100,000 surrenders. It may become more than that.
Do we assume then that there was never any sign of Iraqi troops withdrawing?
No, the briefings that we were getting right up to the last moment were that there were no pre-strike surrenders, no moves at all to withdraw, that they dug in their revetments, in their camps, hundreds, still thousands of tanks dug in. The latest figures that we had from military sources were that the destruction of Iraqi tanks was still only in the area of 16, perhaps 17,000. There's a lot out there that has still got to be attacked. They weren't moving, they were waiting for the inevitable.
Is it your impression that there was a sudden surge across the border? Because we've heard there's been a gradual build-up and certain skirmishes on the way.
Yes, that's right. In fact, for several days now, there have been reconnaissances in force, interventions where small groups have tried a particular point in the line. I think the most significant turning point were those pictures that you saw earlier on, earlier this morning or late last night, when the berms were finally breached and the heavy gear started moving in. It's clearly accelerated. General Kelly at the Pentagon said, when it starts, no one will be in any doubt. No one is. It started.
President Bush is to make an address at 3 o'clock. ITN will bring you that live from the White House. We're back at 2:45. Join us then.
Hello, we're interrupting our normal programme to bring you the latest details on the Gulf War. We will stay on the air as the story develops. As you have probably heard, the ground war has begun to oust Iraqi troops from Kuwait. The latest we have is that Allied troops have crossed the border into occupied Kuwait to start the ground war against Iraq. That is according to the official Saudi television. And the American administration in Washington has confirmed that the ground war has begun. The joint forces have intensified their ground attacks in the last few hours, it said, on the Iraqi positions on the Kuwaiti border. Now, President Bush, who has been at his presidential retreat in Camp David, has now returned to the White House in Washington. This report from the American network CNN.
All right, all of the president's top advisors are gathered here, standing about 50, 60 feet from where I am, none of them in a mood to talk at this point. They're going to let the president make this announcement, but the national security advisor, the vice president is here, the chief of staff, I can see the vice president and Governor Sununu as well walking out towards the helicopter. A number of these people have been clustered here at the White House through the early hours of the evening. Primarily in National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft's office, as the first reports obviously came into them of what was going on in the Persian Gulf. And he presumably relaying those reports to the president up at Camp David, which is about 60 miles from here, up in the Catoctin Mountains of Maryland. It's about a 20-minute helicopter flight. The president and Secretary of State Baker went up there Friday afternoon. As you can see, there's the president now. The president was not just relaxing up at Camp David. He spent a good bit of the time on the phone. In fact, in the hour prior to the noon deadline, he spoke with Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev. Mr. Gorbachev having called President Bush to suggest that there was perhaps a last-minute possibility of merging the U.S. and Soviet plans for a withdrawal from Kuwait. Mr. Bush having told Mr. Gorbachev politely that that just was not going to happen, that the U.S. and its coalition partners were firm in their intention to carry out a ground war if, in fact, the Iraqis made no attempt to withdraw after the noon deadline. The assessment from here at the White House was that there was no action on the part of the Iraqis, and in fact, as spokesman Marlon Fitzwater put it, the Iraqis continued to carry out the destruction of Kuwait with the destruction, as they're calling it here, the scorched earth policy of destroying the oil facilities. Fitzwater also made the point of noting that Iraq's only response to the noon deadline was to fire a Scud missile at Israel. So the president, having given his generals clearer instructions even prior to the noon deadline, allowed things to move forward as they have this evening, and we'll hear from the president himself very shortly. David?
Just a reminder that the ground war has begun. It began at 1 o'clock in the morning, our time. That was 8 hours after the deadline set by President Bush passed for Iraqi troops to leave Kuwait. We're going over now to Alastair Stewart in Riyadh. Alastair, what is the latest from you?
John, I'm actually in Dhahran, but we've been talking to people in Riyadh and we've been talking to military people around here. And what we understand so far is that the 2nd Marine Division is involved in an incursion into Iraq. That's what we've been told, but the military people say nothing will be firmed up completely until after the president has spoken. The 18th Airborne is also reported to have entered Kuwait. Their main armament is Apache helicopters with TOW missiles, which are tank busters, and Hellfire missiles, which can destroy moving vehicles and troop emplacements. There are reports coming through of very heavy surrenders by frontline Iraqi troops. Remember, they are not the Republican Guard. They're the ones who are at the north of Kuwait and south of Iraq. These are regular frontline soldiers. The Allies have made arrangements to take 100,000 of them as prisoners of war. The word we're getting is that it could be more than that. And we worked out that the Pentagon was saying earlier on that they needed a 6-hour countdown to this initiative. And we reckon that General Schwarzkopf must have given the order only about 3 hours after President Bush made his statement and the deadline was passed.
I wonder how that order came through. It was reported here that, in fact, President Bush told General Schwarzkopf even before the deadline that it was entirely in his initiative as to when to start this action.
One of the things that the president has stressed, John, throughout is that he doesn't want to make the mistakes of Vietnam, where President Johnson was seen to be targeting individual sites in Vietnam for bombing raids. President Bush said, leave the diplomacy and politics to me, and I will leave the fighting to you. He has total trust in General Schwarzkopf and in the command structure via Dick Cheney and Colin Powell. And there was no doubt at all that when Powell came over here with Cheney about 10 days ago, that was the arrangement that was reached. It is quite possible that there was an understanding before now, but people at the Pentagon and military sources here confirmed that a final and importantly legal document was signed, passing the order down through the Secretary of Defense to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Colin Powell, and on to Schwarzkopf in the field. He was given the green light. It was then his war. And as one of his officers said, when it begins, it will be prosecuted more violently than any war in history. No one will be in any doubt when it started, and they're not. It has.
Alastair, it's interesting that both times there have been deadlines, the January the 15th deadline to start the war, and now this one. There has been absolutely no hesitation on the part of the White House. They literally haven't waited even so much as a few hours.
Now, I think that's an important point, John, because the word that was coming back to Schwarzkopf, and he would have passed it on up to his political bosses, was that the commanders at a local level, the lieutenant colonels, the majors, people in charge of platoons and companies, the smaller groups, were saying, we can't keep these people penned up for too long. And you'll remember that Paul Davis had his interview with the commanding officer, Brigadier Cordingley, of the 4th Division, who said the politicians can't keep us waiting too long. And there has been a mood reported from the men in the trench that they've trained up. One officer was reported earlier today as saying, you get to a point where you've trained too much. You lose the edge, you lose the initiative, the adrenaline doesn't pump anymore. And I think that may have been a clincher for General Schwarzkopf. There have been a number of people, particularly from the Air Force side, who've been saying, we've done very well indeed in destroying Iraq's army. Only today they reported 1,687, I think it was, 85 tanks destroyed. They reckon that each sortie that was going up with these fighter bombers was taking out 1, 2, 3 tanks. Give us more time, they said, we'll will make it easier. What Schwarzkopf had to do was balance that kind of pressure from his Air Force people against what his army was saying, and his army commanders were clearly saying, the men are at fever pitch and are ready to go, and now is the time to launch it. One other point I should add is that there are tens of thousands of Marines on board ships like the Nassau, like the Iwo Jima, sitting out there in the northern Gulf. Mike Nicholson was reporting on that on our late bulletin last night, saying that they are ready to go. You can't keep people penned up like that for too long, and we expect that the amphibious landing, once this thing gets into full swing, will become an important part of a three-pronged strategy. A major incursion from the west, sweeping in through Iraq and heading for Kuwait. That major push coming up from the south to take the Kuwaiti-Saudi border and head straight for Kuwait City. And the final part of that three-prong pincer movement, that trident of force, will be the amphibious landing sweeping in from the northern Persian Gulf. The Royal Navy minesweepers have been busy there. For the last week we've heard briefings of them picking off mines, destroying them, divers going down, surface mines, also mines that have been down in the depths of the sea. The Royal Navy's been there, the Saudi Navy and the United States Navy as well. It's all been a case of preparation, a gradual build-up. I remember Mike Brunson reporting from the War Cabinet 2 or 3 days ago that he quoted the press spokesman at Downing Street as saying it was a seamless web of preparation that would gradually move into this final phase of the push, where it is going to be prosecuted with speed, with violence. They've used the word quite freely. They are in the business of winning this war, and that is what they're doing now. It's moved into that phase with the order having finally given, as we were saying earlier on, approximately 9 hours ago, to take effect a couple of hours back.
Alastair Stewart in Dhahran, thank you very much indeed for that. Just to remind you that the ground war against Iraq has begun. It began at 1 o'clock in the morning, our time, 8 hours after the deadline set by President Bush, had expired. We're going to take a short break now. Join us again in a couple of moments.